Welcome, everyone, for another episode of Based on a True Story. My name is Matthew Baxter.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Stolzno.
And I'm Blake Smith.
This month, we're going to be talking about a very interesting movie just in time for Valentine's Day
Mhm.
called Picnic at Hanging Rock.
Yeah,
Anybody
and
want to talk?
the link might not be immediately apparent with that, but we should say that this is based on a book, and that the book was set on Valentine's Day in 1900.
And this is part of our series, Based on a True Story, where we examine movies that are allegedly based on true stories. And this one, it fits in an interesting way. So I guess we'll dig into that in a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, it really
yeah.
does.
I think on the surface, people could think, well, this isn't really of that same, it doesn't fit in with that category of movies. But I think that this really does. The more that you unpack the story and the story behind it as well.
So before we get into what the movie's about, Blake, you were saying that you hadn't seen the movie before. I hadn't seen it before either. And I think Karen was really worried that I was going to find it boring or something, but I was pretty riveted. How did it go for you?
It was definitely not boring. I tell you, it was gorgeous. In a sense, if you're the kind of person who enjoys watching, 1890s to 1910s fashion, it's got a lot of that in it. And but what really surprised me, the cinematography was lovely, like all that. But what really surprised me was the soundtrack, which I just couldn't believe. Like, it was a mixture of classical music,
Mm-hmm.
but also electronica in a really interesting way. Like, this is
Mhm.
75. So, this is early. This is early into like electronic music scores. And I was shocked to see that the songs that I found the most haunting were accompanied by a synthesizer and pan flute being played
Mhm.
by the master of the pan flute, Zamfir, which
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can squeeze one of those classic 80s commercials in here, but man, the 1980s, like, I don't know about you guys, but I was watching TV, like, who the hell is Zamfir? And why would I want to hear his
Yeah,
pan flute? But it was brilliant here.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
Yeah,
It really was.
one of my grandmother's favorite movies, and she always wanted. I used to play the flute when I was in school, and she
nice.
wanted me to play that for a school recital at one point. And I bought the sheet music for it and was
Wow.
absolutely petrified. I mean, it is very complex. And then to
Yeah.
discover as well that it's panpipes. It's not really the
A
flute.
standard flute.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah,
yeah. The music was amazing.
very
I
haunting music.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or faunting, if you want to think about the pan flute. You're welcome. You can edit that right out.
Threw
Cool.
me off guard.
So you guys, it was the first time that you'd seen the movie, and I'd seen it when I was a child growing up in Australia, but I hadn't seen it for a long time. And I think certainly to watch it again as an adult, that I saw a lot more in it uh, now than I did before.
So, with you having had seen this when you were younger,
Mhm.
um, did it creep you out as much as Blake and I got creeped out?
Well, I think it did because I didn't really understand the ending. It was just very shocking and frightening. And I guess we should preface this too by saying this entire series of Based on a True Story is about spoilers. So right from
Yes.
the outset, we're going to be revealing what happened. But just
Yep.
for these young girls who were of my age group at the time to
Mm.
go on a school picnic and to just disappear, vanish into thin air, to never be found was very frightening for me. I think from a practical perspective, but certainly now to watch the film as an adult and to look at this from more of an esoteric perspective too. I mean, there's really a lot of things to terrify you with this film, even though on the surface of it too, you might think, oh, it's a bunch of girls who go missing in the bush, and that's it. But there's really a lot more to explore.
Yeah. And I think a lot because of the ambiguity around the ending, it probably back then, in fact, I know for a fact back then, it really got audiences talking when they left. I think uh, that,
Oh,
that,
to this day, yeah.
yeah, I think just it's so different to have a movie where the ending's not clear, and and that's most American studios aren't brave enough to do that anymore for the most part. So
Well, the thing is we did go through a big stretch. I think through the 90s and the early 2000s where we didn't have happy endings.
yeah,
And the thing is before that, a story had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and the end was a happy ending, happily ever after, and that's kind of how things were put together. The only time that didn't happen is if it was a true story, because true stories don't always have happy endings. So I think that's what really lended this to the idea that it was true, was simply the fact that it didn't get resolved. That
yeah.
really set people off balance so much. In much the same way that I think this probably inspired even a little bit the Blair Witch Project. That
I think
there's
so.
that little bit of just not having a good resolution, not
Mhm.
having a happy ending
Yeah, I mean,
can really.
Blair Witch Project is basically Picnic at Hanging Sticks.
Yeah,
So,
but I
Yeah.
would like to read just a little quote from Peter Weir, the director,
sure.
when he was talking about when the film was first screened in the United States. So he says that American audiences were disturbed by the fact that the mystery remained unsolved. So, according to him, one distributor threw his coffee cup at the screen at the end of the film because he'd wasted 2 hours of his life, a mystery without a goddamn solution. So, I think it was frustrating to a lot of audiences. But in the film, and I mean, we're going right to the heart of the spoilers here, but when the girls have gone missing and you start to, the town start to analyze the situation to look at possible explanations, that Jack the Ripper is actually mentioned. And
Yeah.
I mean, this is set in 1900, so we're only about 12 years from those murders. So, I mean, those certainly there are different theories out there, and I, I'm not too sure if that was actually. I think a number of people claim that they've solved the Jack the Ripper murders. So correct me if I'm wrong.
It's never
But
been legitimately solved. There's lots of theories, but no, it's still
I thought Johnny
yeah,
Depp solved it.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
oh, it was Johnny Depp, maybe. But
He is
certainly
timeless.
certainly that is a classic example of a mystery that hasn't been solved, and I think it's interesting that they invoke that in the movie, and then to this day there'll be people who'll complain about the film and say, well, there's no conclusion. But I think that's real life, really,
Yeah.
these cold cases.
I mean,
Well,
I guess we should talk about the plot just a little bit. I mean,
I think
oh,
now, yeah, we've
Plotchmont.
spoiled everything for everyone. Yeah, Matt, do
Well,
you want to
well,
give us a rundown?
that's kind of the thing about this movie is, oh, you don't want to give up the fact that these girls went up in the rocks and disappeared. No, that was like the first 10 minutes of the movie.
yeah.
The
And
rest of the movie,
a lovely 10 minutes.
yes, it was, yeah, it was amazingly shot, and it was incredibly well directed, and it was really, really nice. But it's really what happens after that that is the real movie. And there was an ending. There was resolution in that sense. There wasn't a resolution to this little thing that set everything in motion, but
Mhm.
the rest of the movie ended just like
Oh yeah,
you'd
lots of
expect.
people have complete character arcs. I mean, that's
Yes, yes,
Lots
absolutely.
of theories about it too. Yeah, we'll get
yeah.
into that.
So, but there's all kinds of foreshadowing before they go up
Mm,
there, and I mean, it's really a lot of fun.
mhm.
Especially, I would say, if you were to watch it a second time through, you would catch that much more that was
Yeah.
Right.
said.
Definitely one of those
Um,
kinds of films.
it really is. But the movie is not about three girls disappearing. It is about the impact, in my
Yes.
opinion, that it had on this society and how far-reaching that impact went.
Mhm.
And that's a little bit more of what was happening. Now, there's lots of people say, "Oh, it's about colonialism," and it's about breaking free of the stuffy British, this and that. Sure, maybe, but what I'm just seeing is basically you don't hear about these kind of things when you see in the newspaper that somebody vanished without a trace, and it happens a lot. I had to kind
Mhm.
of dive into this, because the stories about three girls that disappeared and huge big deal. Well, hundreds of thousands of people disappear without a trace, unsolved every year. I mean,
Mhm.
it's that big of a thing. But you never hear about the far-reaching ramifications.
Right.
This caused suicides. It caused businesses to shut down and people to go bankrupt. I mean, just it caused so many strange things that have impacted people's lives in a way that we don't normally get to see. So the
Right.
fact that it kind of opened that window on an entirely different story from one we're used to seeing when it comes to a mystery like this. So the story wasn't the mystery, the story was the impact it had on real people. I mean, seemingly real people. So that's kind of the difference I see with this movie, more than an M. Night Shyamalan movie or something.
Right.
Yeah.
What a twist. There's no ending. But
Yeah. But I think, the fact that it's left open and that to this day people are still arguing about what really happened, and a lot of people believing that this was a true story, that it's really, if they had at the time had an ending or shown that ending in the film, because there is a lost ending, which was not part of the cut that we have watched today.
Yeah, what we watched was the director's cut. The original theatrical one had that extra scene in. Did you get to see it, Blake?
I didn't see the extra scene.
Okay,
the
go ahead.
Original did have an extra scene.
Yes.
And so the director's cut took it out. That's fascinating.
Yes.
What's the missing scene? What have I missed?
Well, I think we should talk about the plot first. I think we should go back. Matt, do you want to give us a run through of that, and then we can talk about the ending and the theories?
Okay, well, basically, and I don't know what I should leave in and leave out of this run through, because so much is important and so much isn't, and it's up to you to decide which is which. But basically, you're looking at these mostly very well-to-do young girls going to this finishing school, for lack of a better word. Was it Appleyard College? So
named after the principal.
The principal, yes. Now, who is the most frightening character in the movie? Absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Hairstyle.
I loved her hair, though. I looked
becomes
at it.
Increasingly more disheveled, I think, over the course of the movie, which really shows the mental state of her and everyone else.
Yeah. If this was done today, her hair would have its own Twitter account.
There's a strong parallel between her hairstyle and the school mistress in the original Suspiria. Did you notice that? I wondered if that influenced Argento. Yeah,
yeah. It's very influential hair. There's no doubt about it. Loved it. But she was terrifying, and you could tell just from her demeanor that there were abuses going on at the school that were probably common for the day. We get to see more of those later in the film, but several of them get to go on a picnic on a Saturday, and it was I believe on Valentine's Day 1900. Now, spoiler again, the dates were wrong in all of it, but
it was a Wednesday, I believe.
It was actually a Wednesday, not a Saturday.
History.
Blah blah blah. Yeah, who pays attention to actual history? And they didn't have the internet, so I'm not going to blame her.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, libraries, what are they? So the thing is, they load up and they go out there to this place where they're going to have a picnic at a place called Hanging Rock Park, I believe, or is it just Hanging Rock?
It's Hanging Rock, and I don't know if we want to talk a little bit about that at all.
We have a Hanging Rock Park here in America, and that's why it gets confusing.
Okay.
So, and in fact, last year a boy went missing at Hanging Rock Park. So in my investigation, I pulled that up, trying to find people who have gone missing at Hanging Rock. Anyway, so they get there, and there's actually another British family there, kind of enjoying a picnic as well, but they don't really cross paths very, very much. So, so the girls are kind of lazing about and everything. A couple of them go, "Hey, we want to go investigate the rocks." Now, Hanging Rock is basically a volcanic formation that's very impressive, and a lot of the monoliths look like there's some facial pareidolia there. You can see old faces in the monoliths, and it's very creepy looking. But they decide that they want to go on a little expedition, and I think there was 5 of them in total that started out.
Well, four girls. So there was Miranda, and there was Marion, there was Irma, and
That's
Edith.
Right. That's right, because the one that came back was of the original 3.
Right.
Yeah.
And they eventually
Edith.
Yep.
Yeah,
And then
the math teacher.
The math teacher went to go and see what was wrong and what had happened.
That was Miss McCraw. And I should add too, for the Australian audience, that some of the actors in this movie are pretty well known. So Miss McCraw, her name is Vivian Gray, or she passed a couple of years ago, but she was very famously in the TV show Prisoner. I think, Blake, you've Heard of that before?
The
I'm
one
sure
from
you've
the
talked about it
60s.
before.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. And she also played Mrs. Mangle, the nosy neighbor on Neighbours. And so the girl who plays Miranda, Anne Louise Lambert, so she was in a TV soap called Number 96 back in the 70s. And Jackie Weaver is a famous actress in Australia, and she plays the maidservant Minnie as well. But yeah, the teacher, Miss McCraw, the one who goes missing, she's very strange, very eerie.
Yeah, she's got a whole level of creepy herself in this. But the young man, boy slash man that's with the British family, the son, he and a what would you call the Australian guy? I
Well,
don't know if he
yeah,
was. I wouldn't call him a servant, but he was working for them.
yeah, I
Uh,
think he was, yeah, like a horseman
yeah,
or
but he was
some
like
kind of,
age wise, he was some kind of a peer. Like I mean, they were the same age with different
yeah,
educations and backgrounds. Yeah.
exactly,
yes, very,
exactly.
very clearly.
They
And
seem to
yeah,
have
he
a
was
friendly, like they seem to like care about each other, like in a friendly. I think they were sort of like,
over beer, I
Well,
think.
yeah, yeah.
yes, yes. To analyze it, it was the young man shedding the stuffiness of British society to lower himself, to hang out and not wipe off the top of the bottle to take a
They
drink.
were sharing, yeah.
He was really shedding that British stuffiness to do that.
Allow me to unwind. Undoes one button.
Yeah.
Yeehaw. But the thing is, they get together and they're kind of bonding, and they see the four girls crossing a stream and heading up there, and you know, more than anything, they just noted that was happening.
We learned from Ghostbusters crossing the stream is very dangerous. So
Don't
Yeah,
cross the
yeah.
stream. And
Well, he
yeah,
does, the English fellow, he does go after them a little bit
he
because he
does.
seems to immediately fall in love with Miranda.
yes,
But I mean, obviously, just from a literary perspective, there's so much symbolism. It's a new way of saying it.
Yeah.
Let me try that again. There's so much
coined by Blake.
symbolism.
Yeah.
It's like, crossing over the water before they go up the mountain, and then some of them don't come back. So is that symbolically like the river Styx, or it's definitely a barrier being transcended, right? So
Yes.
absolutely.
And then
absolutely.
I think she's replaced by a swan. He sees a swan, and then that becomes
Multiple times.
a motif throughout the film too, and that even appearing, I think, in his bedroom and in his dreams, and he just keeps
yeah, and I
seeing
don't think
this
that's
swan representing her.
I was gonna say, and it is not strictly just symbolism. I think that there's I think an intentional sort of nod to some Aboriginal folklore about changing forms and that sort of thing going on there. But that's just, I don't know enough about Aboriginal culture, unfortunately. So
Yeah, I don't know about that. I mean, it's very possible. Certainly, you could read a lot into this film.
it has to do with the end of the book, the missing chapter. There's some stuff in there that makes me think that the director's choices here were not just random or whatever. So
Okay.
Yeah. So did you read that final chapter?
I didn't read. I read a summary. It's not very long apparently, but
I did read it. So
okay,
we can comment on it. Absolutely.
I would just say that I
We
sent you
will.
guys a couple of newspaper articles that were contemporaneous to 1975,
did
and
see
I
that.
thought it was really interesting because in one, it's like a movie review, and they're just like, we think this is a true story. We don't know. They're just they're apparently true. And then in the others, like, I figured this out, and it goes into all the stuff that actually does show up in that missing chapter. So it's like, apparently the clues are there if you're in the right frame of mind.
We do need to talk about that, I think, in context.
Exactly. I don't want to spoil it. We'll get to it real soon. So
Yep. So I'll rush this along a little bit. They climb up the hill. The girl that's sort of the outcast that goes with them. They said, "Oh, you can come along if you don't complain," and she
little dumpy one.
complains. Yes, she complains the entire time, and finally she screams her head off and leaves, and goes back. Then the other three, in a complete daze, a dreamlike state, continue on up the mountain. That's it. That's the last we really see of them. They're gone, and then it's search parties, and it's this young man being desperate to find them, and eventually even pulling in his Aussie friend to try to find them as well, who eventually finds one of them, and she remembers nothing. But because of this,
we should say too that Edith doesn't remember anything either. I mean,
right.
they all, when they fall asleep on the rock for a time, and she wakes up and she seems terrified by something unseen, but she can't describe it. She can't explain what's happened. She can't remember anything, and neither can Irma as well, when she is found, I think, about a week later, which, considering this is Valentine's Day, which is summertime in Australia, I can only imagine the heat. I mean, we're talking 30 degrees, something, Celsius, that temperature for days on end with no water. It just, and I guess we're going to get into this soon too. Yeah, she would not have survived under normal circumstances in that kind of climate.
Yeah. And these were definitely not normal circumstances, whatever.
Exactly.
Whatever it is.
But we start seeing that parents are pulling their girls out of the school, and on top of the ones that were lost that are now no longer paying tuition and everything, it's really crippling the school. And the principal, it becomes more terrifying. I think because of the stress that she's under, on top of the fact of losing several of her students, that heartbreak coupled with the stress of the financial aspect of it, she starts kind of losing it. And everybody's just, nobody's telling us anything. Who's lying? Who knows what's going on? They're not telling us. And just this pressure keeps mounting and mounting throughout
just imagine
the movie.
If they had Twitter. Good Lord.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, I think there's even some xenophobia against the English fellow and his family, and did he? And I guess we're now getting into the theories of what happened.
Exactly.
I mean, initially they look at the kind of practical possible explanations. Were these girls kidnapped? And the teacher, were they abducted and raped or molested? And so one of the theories floating around is that the English guy had raped or molested the girls and then somehow taken them away. I mean, that's, I think, the main theory that they posit in the film anyway.
Well, and it's interesting because they really do put a lot of focus on that. In fact, the words, she's intact, were said multiple times by the doctor throughout the movie when they were, doing an examination to make sure the girls were physically okay. They were still virgins, so it was good.
It was strange, though, because as they announce later in the film, I think the maid discovers that Irma was without her corset. So something had happened to her corset. And certainly, I mean, you have to put it in context again for the day. The ladies, the principal said to the girls as they were leaving, once you get past or out of the town, you can take your gloves off, which must have been a huge relief in the summertime in Australia to be able to take something off, given the heat. And yet when these girls are on the rock, they start stripping down and taking their stockings off. And so it's just mysterious. It's almost like, and at one point later on too, they do discover part of, I think, some lace from one of the dresses. So there's that kind of implication there that girls were raped and had little bits of their clothing were left behind.
So one of the interesting things about this is there is a focus on time, in this movie, and the principal, makes it very clear what time they are to be back. When they get out there, it's very clear what time they need to be back down to get ready to get back to be on time. And yet when they get out there, their watches all stop at 12 noon.
Yeah.
Suddenly there is no more time in a sense for this area, it seems.
Oh, yeah, I love it because the math teacher says it must be something magnetic,
Yes.
Yeah. And Miranda also says too, before she leaves for the picnic, she says everything begins and ends at exactly the right time and place. So there is that kind of running theme of time. And I guess we're kind of cutting closer to the ending again, but it seems like Joan Lindsay, the author of the novel, that a lot of people believed, or she believed too, that she was a mystic, and she had this ability to, or reputed ability to be able to stop clocks.
Yes, yeah.
So it's kind of,
she's like the
like
opposite
Uri
of Uri
Geller.
Geller. She's like
Yeah,
the
oh,
anti-Geller.
yeah.
The
The two
Anti-Geller.
of them together, yeah, powerhouse.
Yeah, yeah. What a show that would be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be fantastic. Um, yeah, so it's very interesting how they did this. Seem to have been ignored, by a lot of people that were reviewing or trying to figure out things. That there's this focus on time. In fact, you walk in the principal's office, and there is always the sound persistent of ticking,
Hmm.
from the clocks. And until it's brought to your attention, you don't even really notice. But it is just really persistent how it's such a huge feature in her life.
Hmm.
This sort of rigid, uh, sort of worship almost of time.
Well, yeah,
Um,
I think again throughout the school there are clocks, and you don't really pick it up, I think, on the first viewing, but certainly if you go back and watch it again, that really does seem to be a running theme.
It does. And
yeah.
one of those students talks about keeping a clock around her neck, and she stopped because she hated the way the ticking was always right above her heart.
Yes.
Like
That's right.
there's all kinds of symbolism in here. The
References,
English
yeah.
major in me loves this, but Mrs. Appleyard is the name of the teacher.
Hmm.
Um, and so much of the movie is about sort of escaping the constraints of modernity,
Hmm.
to get this little exposure to this sort of primitive garden area. So in some ways, I think there's some sort of Eden symbolism going on there. These girls they disappear into the garden, like they've escaped to the garden from this world where rules and regulations and everything, expectations, all of this stuff lies out there for them. As they going through this wilderness, they're literally like going back to nature as they're taking off their clothes.
Stripping off
They're
everything,
losing a
Hmm.
sense of time, and it becomes a timeless, mysterious place. There's this whole concept of liminality that we talk a lot about, the thin places, as they say in the paranormal, where you can sort
Hmm.
of shift between this world of reality and the
Yes.
spiritual world. And it
Where the
seems like they've
veil
set
is
it
thin.
the veil is thin. These are the thinny places. It seems like they've set up the whole mountain to be that kind of a place. And
Hmm.
I don't know, but I don't think before this movie or book that was actually how that location was perceived, but I think it is now. Is that
Um,
I believe it was an important place for several different Aboriginal tribes.
yeah.
Um,
yeah, there were several indigenous communities that lived in that area, and were that area was very important to them for, I think, initiation ceremonies for men,
Yeah.
and just very sacred ceremonies. And very sadly, they were dispossessed by the colonizers, who came in and turned the area into a kind of picnic area, and even a race course was set up there. This isn't too far away from Melbourne either. It's only about 70 kilometers away from Melbourne. So even though it's in the outback, it seems like it's just so remote and so far away. It's not really that far away from a major city, but the place was extremely important. And I do believe that the Aboriginal people believed that the summit of Hanging Rock was haunted by evil spirits. So I think that belief has been there for a very long time. And certainly nowadays, with this story, which has really overshadowed, I think, the true history of the location,
Yeah.
that it has, people do now claim that they've seen the ghosts of these girls there, and that they've had all different kinds of paranormal experiences there. But yeah, I mean, as Matt was saying earlier, if you look at these rock formations, they're incredible, and some of them, there's a lot of pareidolia going on there. Some of them really do look like they're evil faces, evil spirits.
Oh, that's
Um,
Scaradolia. Mm.
Scaradolia,
Yes.
yeah. And so that was, I think, another theory too, in the movie, and certainly afterwards, that maybe the girls slipped into a crevice in the rocks somewhere. I mean, it's a very complicated structure. It's something like 6.25 million years old. And, I think that could explain too why Irma may have been lost for a period of time. She could have really just been wandering around and trying to get out of there. It's just a very, very complicated structure. But it's, yeah, certainly got a long history and has been perceived in different ways. But nowadays, I think a lot of people really map on the novel to the location and its history.
Yeah. Now, I know one of the things about our series is is it true? Like, I mean, is this a true story? And again, it's hard to find a place where it's explicitly stated that this is supposed to be a true story, but the original novel is written in such a way that it strongly implies that it's real events. Like, it's got historical context. I don't like, I've only gotten to look at little excerpts. I haven't read the thing from end to end, but it's written like a novel. But it's not. I thought perhaps it was an epistolary type thing, where like it would be written newspaper clippings and that sort of thing. Like, I don't know if you ever read Stephen King's book Carrie, which is his first big novel, but it's written, the whole thing is like newspaper clippings and like all this additional material that makes it feel like it's a real event that happened. And
well, look at Bram Stoker's Dracula.
There you go, another one, great example.
It's a good example of that type of thing. But yeah, this was, I have to defend that first little note at the beginning of the novel, because it says, whether Picnic at Hanging Rock is fact or fiction, my readers must decide for themselves. As the fateful picnic took place in the year 1900, and all the characters who appear in this book are long since dead, it hardly seems important.
Yeah.
Now,
and I believe that was taken out, and then it was
taken out. She actually altered it to read fact or fiction or both. Is what that was actually replaced with. But the thing is you open any novel, and from the first words, it's stating things as, this is real, this is true, this is the story you're reading. This, you've opened the first page, you're now in the story, so it's real for the story. You go outside the story. Is that real? Well, no, it's a story, and that's how this is. She didn't have like a thing in front of the book that says this is based on a true story, or maybe it isn't. She didn't say that. It was when you got into the novel that it said that. So I have to have a little defense there for her that was just clever. Blair Witch Project
is the
again.
Word. Yeah, like I think she's very coy and savvy about straddling that line, and I think she knows that it's to the financial benefit of the book to leave it as an open question.
I think that was an agreement that she had with the publisher as well, and they just decided, yes, this is a work of fiction. And at one point, Peter Weir had asked her if the story was true, and that she said, "Oh, never ask me that again." So she's been very secretive about this. But then I think in other cases or other times, she's actually said that the story was entirely true. So she's said different things at different times, but she's been very very secretive about the story. But I think that in the front of it too, she does have a newspaper clipping, or it's a part of the fiction.
Wasn't it like was it 1917 or something? When did that supposedly come out? That clipping?
I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure, but yeah, there was a newspaper clipping, and yet if you go and search, there's a website called Trove, which is I guess a treasure trove of digital newspapers and other documents, and there is just no evidence that those events took place or anything like that in that area. I mean, certainly there are cases of missing people in other parts of the country, and even I think in the Melbourne area, but there's nothing detailing that story. So certainly if this had happened in 1900, absolutely at that point that it would have been recorded, it would have been documented, and we'd have evidence, but there is nothing in existence.
Yeah. When I used to do the theatrical seances, I created a newspaper clipping from the Rocky Mountain News that had, other stories around it and everything. And it looked very convincing, but it was fake. And the thing is I wasn't pulling off any fraud. It was just supporting the story I was telling, is all it was. And I think that she did the same thing there. And the bottom line is she is saying here is a novel. It may or may not be true, but if it was true, she would be going, this is true. Here's the evidence. Here's the backup. This is true. Listen, read the story. This is great. This is a selling point. This is true. But the fact that she was coy about it is, to me, obvious that it is not true, because you would play that card. You would play it hard if you had it like that. So, but that's just my opinion. Maybe they got more out of it this way. I don't know. But there are people.
Absolutely. To this day, people, in Australia and the rest of the world just think that this did happen and that it's an unsolved story. And I think it's just really added to the legend. I mean, it's really, I don't know how much of this she anticipated and how much of this kind of organically happened, because it's been very successful for the movie.
Well, it's kind of interesting. Karen, you and I have watched multiple videos talking about the movie. It seems like one of the things that Australians there love to do is try to convince you it's true, even though they themselves don't believe it. They think it's funny to convince tourists that this is true. To be honest, I had a similar experience when we went to New York to the Hotel Chelsea Hotel. And the staff there were trying to convince us it was haunted until we got one of them cornered, and he's like, no, it's true. Mm-hmm. And that was heartbreaking that none of it was true. But
does that make it a heartbreak hotel?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. But having said
Elvis
that, I still, from what I've read and seen, there are a lot of Australians who do believe that it happened, or everything is just murky and grey enough that they assume that it had happened.
Absolutely. We watched that video just before this episode, taping this episode, and this, I believe it was Canadian, was asking these Australians, is this story true? He was actually out there at Hanging Rock and said, is this story true? One guy's like, nah, mate. And then the woman there was like, it's just a novel, but it did happen. And she was absolutely, to her, what's in the novel is, sort of a fictionalized account, but it did happen. Maybe all the stuff around it didn't happen the way the novel says, but don't go up there.
Yeah, and I think it was that same Canadian. I think he got locked into the park and was closed in there. Yep. And after hours, couldn't find a park ranger, and eventually called the police. And it took them about an hour to get out there to rescue him and to let him out of there. And I think he was surrounded by a pack of angry kangaroos at one point, trying to protect their young and their girlfriends. And the police turned up and saved him and said, look, you better be careful about this, and don't do this kind of thing again, otherwise you're going to become the sequel to the book. So again, I think there's a lot of popular beliefs out there that it happens, and people just don't even dig further into it. They just kind of accept at face value, this must have been a true story.
Now there's kind of a second mystery within the story, which is, and again, we've already said there's spoilers, but like one of the big surprises, well, there's a character who's one of the girls who's not allowed to go on the trip, and she's not allowed because she's been like at odds with the instructor, I guess with Mrs. Appleyard, and she's also an orphan who's I guess supporting patron has disappeared. So like she's got all kinds of peril falling in on her. But towards the very end of the movie, she goes off the top of a building, and I think we could assume it's suicide. But also, when
glad you brought this up, Blake.
They go to tell her that this girl's dead, and they find the school mistress already dressed in mourning, like she's already dressed. And then they say right after that she ultimately went up to the rock and jumped off of it. So it's like, holy cow, what an ending! It's like there's a murder that we don't really know. Is it a murder? Is it a suicide? And then, I don't know. I don't know the answer. Like that's also ambiguous. So.
That shot of them on Mrs. Applegate.
Appleyard.
Applegate. Yeah.
I keep wanting to say Applebaum. Apple something.
Yeah.
Apple pie.
Yeah.
Apollonia.
Applewhite.
Apoplexy, whatever.
Yeah.
Tim Apple. The thing is, is that scene when the camera's on her, and it's like she kind of does this thing, and then she goes.
Oh, it's much
terrifying.
Much slower than that. Yeah, she's very intimidating. I think the first time that I saw the movie, I had assumed that she had murdered the girl, and that I think she was taking out her frustrations of what had happened to her business and just everything crumbling around her. She'd taken it out on this girl. And one of the reasons that made me think she'd done that is when she's having dinner with the French mistress, the French teacher, And then when she says that the girl's benefactor, who's a Mr. Cosgrove, I think,
Yeah.
you even wonder if something didn't go on there, because she, as you said, was an orphan, and she was in an orphanage for a time, and then suddenly she's adopted by this Mr. Cosgrove, and you wonder if some abuses took place there. Um, and then he just suddenly stops payment when she's attending their school. So it just seems like the principal's taking her anger out on her, but she lies to the teacher, and she says, "Oh yes, Mr. Cosgrove came and collected her, picked her up this morning."
Yes.
So that lie made me think, okay, she did something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the
But
thing is, this girl Sarah, is it Sarah?
Sarah. Yeah.
Sarah,
Um,
yeah,
she
Wayborn, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you're left to wonder: did she have a little flip out, and then Mrs. Applebaum had to hop in. Apple Dumpling Gang just leaped into action,
Yeah.
and the scuffle ensued, and
And then applesauce. Exactly. Right. But
we
But
see it
did you?
happen time and time again.
I can't remember now. We've talked about so many things. Did you? I thought someone mentioned this at some point, that she was. You discover later in the film that she's the sister of Bertie,
A
who's
Bertie,
the.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
rather sad. They're like these two ships passing in the night. That her brother had been at the picnic at Hanging Rock. He'd been there at the time when this had transpired, and that they could have, if she had attended that, she would have been there, and they could have come into contact with each other. And then towards the end, her brother has that
that
dream
dream,
where she appears to
yeah.
him, and that's just very, very sad. I think.
Well,
Um,
I think this
well,
is a great moment. I'm sorry, go ahead, Karen.
oh no, no, I think you're going to go exactly where I was going to go, which is to talk about the lost ending.
Yes, yeah, I think it's a perfect opportunity for that.
Let's fill Blake in on that.
So yeah, basically,
The
that was
truth.
in the original cut, and then it was taken out because it didn't completely fit the narrative of the rest of the movie. But what basically happens is, Mrs. Appleyard goes, she's spiraling downward.
yes.
Obviously she's
Her hair as well.
yes, her hair as well. So they actually have this scene of her going up to
Oh,
Hanging
really?
Rock. Yes.
Okay.
In
And
her
so
mourning garb as well.
yes, and it's getting messed up as she's climbing up there and everything, but she manages to get up there, and she lays down and falls
Yeah.
asleep right in that
Oh.
same spot.
Yeah, yeah.
And then she gets up, after a time, she gets up and she goes to that same crevice where the girls disappeared, and
Hmm.
she looks up and she's all in black, and it's just really this stark black figure that's standing there, and she looks up in the crevice, and this white figure walks right in front where you can see on the other side of the crevice, and it's startling at first, and then you
Hmm.
realize it's Sarah dressed
Hmm.
in white, and she smiles, and does she hold out her hand, something of
Like
that
a
nature,
rose?
She's
Like,
somewhat
yeah.
somewhat seems to beckon her a little
beckons
bit.
her, and
To the
then
other side. So it's another
Yeah.
liminal space kind of thing. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
And
So
symbolically, they're showing she's being invited to come join her at the other side of
Yes.
that the great
that
divide.
all is forgiven, it seems,
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
It's a very interesting ending. But I thought it was great. I liked it,
Oh,
and
it
I
was
just
very eerie. I mean, I can feel goosebumps just from thinking about it. I mean,
Wow.
if
Yeah.
you've seen the movie, go to YouTube and look up the lost ending of Picnic at Hanging Rock, and definitely watch that, because I really think it fills in the blanks a lot. And
That's
I
so
mean, but
fascinating.
it's a different theory again to what's posited in that lost chapter.
Yeah.
So I think we should talk about that a little bit. So this
Yes.
is
Yes.
a chapter that was released posthumously after the author died, maybe 3 months after she died, and
yeah,
it's chapter 18, and it tells the ending. And so you guys have read it. You've both read it.
I've read a summary of it, so I feel like I
Okay.
have a good.
I think Matt,
I'd love to read it. Like I said, it's not very long at all.
it's pretty short. It is pretty
Yeah.
short. So basically, I'll just try to see if I can go from memory on what had happened. Now they went up there. They fell asleep. And it was interesting because, in the movie, you see that lizard that kind of walks up while
I
they're
think the
asleep.
blue tongue lizard. Yep.
Yeah. That's actually in the book. And what it states is these lizards run away from people. You don't just have one of these lizards walk up to you. They
Mm.
run away. So the
They
fact that
hide.
they were so asleep there, it was almost like they weren't there at all for this lizard to walk up. Is kind of how it's
Well, you do see
stated.
ants climbing over them too, and
Ants are
other
eating
bugs.
cake, and I got really hungry for cake
Yeah, yeah.
during that part. So it's a real subliminal kind of movie. Um, but the thing is they wake up, and there's this sound coming through the bushes and stuff. It sounds like there's an animal or something, a living creature is coming through the bushes at them. You hear the twigs cracking and everything. And then finally they see that it's this old woman who is dressed somewhat like a clown. Very, very bizarre clothing and everything. And she's tangled up. She's got these really skinny legs that go into these black boots, and she's tangled up in the bushes, and they help her get untangled. And she comes out, and her voice is very croaky. And she kind of acts like she doesn't really know what's going on either, but she still tries to give them, these kind of strange guidance things, little quotes and stuff. Now, it's at that point that they're like, oh, let's take these corsets off because we have enough ribs to keep us vertical. So they take off the corsets and they throw them, and they're like, oh, we should put them somewhere nice, so we can collect them later. Where are they? And then the clown lady, as she gets called after that, croaks that they're over there, avert your eyes over there, and you'll see them. And they were floating just in midair. One of the girls takes a stick and she's swatting at them, and it just seems like there's nothing happens. And that's what becomes sort of obvious, that they are kind of caught in time, in a different time than they're actually standing in. So they threw them just outside of this time area.
So they're in the corset of human events.
So how many of these did you plan ahead of time?
They're just coming to
That's
me.
the scary thing.
Yes, I think that there's a little bit of time dilation here going on, where he has time to come up with these things. So from there, they see the snake, and it's a really beautiful snake, and one of them caresses its scales as it goes by, and it goes
back
down
to the Eden thing, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And it goes down into this crevice, and one of the girls, I believe
That's
was,
what snakes do.
yeah. So anyway, one of the girls gets down. She's like clawing at the ground where it was, and there is a hole there. And the clown lady is like, no, don't, you don't have to do all that. You just make your body fit the earth, not make the earth fit you. Which I believe that is a bit of an indigenous people concept.
Either that or Yoda, something like that.
I mean, when I saw the documentary Crocodile Dundee,
yes,
he did talk about how they never felt like they owned the land; they felt like they belonged to it. And so I think it's a little bit of that kind of idea. Don't make the earth fit you; you fit the earth.
There's that scene. That's not corporeal phasing. That's corporeal phasing right there.
Yes. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
So the woman then sort of crunches herself into, like, at first she looks like a crab, her hands look like they're pinchers and everything, and then she goes into these weird shapes and goes down into the hole, and she lets them know that you'll hear a tapping when it's time for the next one to come. And I think it was Marion was going to be next, and then it was going to be Miranda was after that. So she
And
kind
just
of
like that, they were gone.
Yeah, well, she oozes down into it, and then she hears the tapping. The Miranda goes down, and Irma is trying to stop her from going, and she's just like, "What do you mean, go home? This is where we're supposed to be," kind of thing. And she goes down, and Irma's just clawing at the ground, freaking out, screaming and everything. That's why she was all scraped up, and out of it. But then couldn't remember anything, probably because of the time dilation. And it ends with kind of a strange quote here. And I don't know if you saw this quote, Blake, when you saw the thing. Irma had flung herself down on the rocks and was tearing and beating at the gritty face of the boulder with her bare hands. She had always been clever at embroidery. They were pretty little hands, soft and white. The end.
Yeah. So
It's a little weird.
Yeah,
A little.
A very unsatisfying ending. And so I think in many ways it would be better to leave the film being unanswerable and leaving it as a mystery. But there is more to this chapter 18.
There's also let's see if this will show up or not. There's also a little illustration that comes right after it of these plants, which looks astonishing like the
Like a
female
uterus.
reproductive
Yeah, it
system.
looks like a uterus. Yeah.
So
Oh yeah.
it's a very strange ending.
But so there was a chapter, there was a final chapter to the novel, and it was deleted at the request of the publisher. So that part is true. However, it seems that what was released posthumously after the author's death may well be a hoax, and it seems as though it could have even been a hoax by the publisher. That's one claim, anyway, that the publisher had written this, or another author had written this story, and that this reinvigorated interest in the movie and the book at the time. But it just does seem like the final chapter is written in a slightly different tone to the rest of the novel. So it's very possible that this is just a hoax.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's an interesting quote here that I wanted to read to you especially. Here we go. So this, I think his name was John Taylor, and he went from this into being the bass player for Duran Duran. But before that, he says, because he was given this chapter, and he says, being a professional publishing person, I naturally hadn't read the book. People in publishing rarely have time to read anything, a fact that accounts for much of the tension which arises between them and authors. Publishers refer to books as titles and collectively as lists. Lists of titles are what publishing is about. Actual pages of print are too time-consuming. So I did find that an interesting perspective, and one that does kind of open up, when you feel like you have this beautiful work of art, and why can't these publishers see that? That's why they're not reading this stuff. So just an interesting quote I wanted to throw in there. True story. What about disappearances at Hanging Rock? Have we found much in that way? Is there anything that this could be anchored to, or is this a case of disappearances are so common that it wasn't far-fetched for people to believe it was real? What do we think?
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to let you go first, because what I was going to say is kind of tangential to this, but anyway.
Well, I was going to say, my take on it is this seems like a work of fiction that people see, like as fiction, like any kind of writing is an abstraction, and it's a model, and it's like we make these fictional models of reality. We have characters that do things, whatever. But if you do a fictional story based on the kinds of things that really happen, it's going to be really easy to find examples that kind of parallel. And I think there were other missing persons cases that happened a few years before she wrote this book. And you'll find articles now say, would you like to hear the real story about the missing people behind the Hanging Rock story? And like, okay.
Great clickbait.
Chronologically, yes, it preceded the book, but that does not mean she drew from that. I mean, that just doesn't. So I'm very skeptical of that. Although, if I wrote a book about missing kids, it'd be almost impossible for me to keep that clear of the 1980s Atlanta child murders, because that was me growing up. That was on the news all the time. It was such a big part of, being in this area during that time frame. So,
yeah. And there have been a number of accidents which have taken place at the location. So I think it was about 2002. Sadly, there was a 13-year-old boy who was climbing the rock with his family, and he fell and died. And I believe even in December of last year, 2021, there was an elderly gentleman who had an accident there and fell and died. So there have been a number of incidents that have taken place there, and certainly cases of missing people, missing persons, they do take place all the time. So there is that possibility there. There are still some other strange legends that have arisen from the story, claims about what really happened. And I think it's interesting in that some of those seem to be to have developed and to be in alignment with the kinds of theories that we've come up with today. So I found out recently another claim is that the girls were abducted by aliens. So it's probably not the sort of thing that historically people would have thought, but nowadays, doesn't that sound just in line with the kind of things that we hear about?
Yes.
I mean,
people going missing, and missing periods of time is all linked to aliens and
mhm.
spaceships.
Hmm.
And also, I guess, to tie in with monster talk too, another theory is that there's a creature or some kind of monster that's living inside of the rock and had claimed these girls, and
Dresses
basically,
like a clown lady.
yeah, that doesn't fit in with anything else. So I'm really glad that that wasn't kept in the novel, and I'm glad, although I do think it would have been interesting if they'd kept that lost footage in the film. I think it would have really
Yeah.
explained a lot, and it is certainly very eerie.
She said, supposedly, this is something between her and the publisher, that well, she never said publicly, but she wanted this chapter to be released after the movie because there was no way that they could have filmed it. Some things are best left to the literary world, while other things can be brought into, film. Um, but she did not believe that this would be well filmed, so that's why there's a separate chapter. Now, whether or not you want to believe she actually ever said that, we don't have any proof she did. So that's it's up to you guys to decide.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
but
there are such enormous numbers of unsolved missing person cases around the world. And those are just the ones that are reported. There's also a ton that
mm,
go unreported. A lot of minorities don't get their stories told. You have places on Earth that there are tribes living, that obviously those don't get reported. I mean, there's just a ton of people that just vanish. And I'm
mm.
pretty sure that it is aliens.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Must be, always is. But
It's interesting the things they didn't. I mean, nobody seemed to suggest wildlife. I mean, they mentioned spiders and snakes and all these things, but like, that's then nobody said dingoes ate my ladies. They just it was like,
yeah, I think there's a good quote too in the film, and it kind of goes by unremarkably, but I think it's
it's
worth
a good
mentioning
scene. I know
too.
where. Yep, yep.
Oh, I'm not sure if you know what
I
I'm talking
bet
about,
you.
but
I bet you I do. Let's go.
okay. Well, so the school
Tell me,
gardener.
Blake, in secret, and then
No.
that way I'll know if you're lying. Okay, let's
So
see.
the school gardener, when he's referencing everything that's happened, and he says there's some questions got answers and some haven't. So I'm
Yes.
not. Yeah, that's. I think that is a really neat
That
way to.
in a cool scene too, because he shows that there's some plants that can move.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
that was a terrible. That was not an Australian accent.
That was good enough.
Okay, so I was just like, but like showing him the fern and touching it, the movie's beautiful. It's
It
such a
is.
beautiful film, and I guess this came at a time when Australian the movie industry was really having a big renaissance. I mean, they had this was right around the time of Mad Max and several other big Australian films that made it into the
Yeah.
U.S.
Well,
and
it really opened the
Yeah.
doors for Quigley Down Under. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, it opened the doors for Peter Weir because he went on to film Dead Poets Society and the Truman Show and a number of other films. So that really made him, and certainly his filming style is just beautiful and haunting, and has been recreated by many other directors and producers over the years.
Yeah.
It really inspired a lot of people, and I think it's a really inspirational book and a really inspirational movie too. And it's worth seeing. I think on the surface of things, again, it just seems like it's a story of girls going missing, and it just doesn't seem like it's very interesting. But again, once you unpack it, there's just so much to it.
so what
And
quote did you think she was going to say?
oh, that's the one. I thought that
Oh,
whole scene.
good.
Yeah.
You're
Exactly what I
such a
thought she was
liar.
going to say. No,
Yeah.
it's like
I,
the show notes. But no, I just
yes.
it's so gorgeous. I didn't know what to expect exactly. I mean, I felt like I had a good handle on like the main mystery, but that doesn't really. I mean, that's only half the movie. I mean,
Mhm.
the other half of the movie is watching these people react, fall apart, and systems collapse in the face of this
Mhm.
tragedy. So
Yeah.
man, and there's all kinds of sort of meta conversations we could have about it, but beyond the question of is it right to have a movie with no firm ending, I just think it was extremely well handled. It just, yeah, very impressive.
Did you
Yeah.
watch, perchance, in your research, the review that Siskel and Ebert did of this?
No, but I read that Ebert liked it, but I didn't see the review. So
Yeah, Siskel was angry.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Ebert loved it. He thought it was gorgeous the
Yeah.
way they did all that, and just to have no resolution was perfect. And Siskel was like, it's like getting this beautiful package, and it's wrapped so gorgeously, and you open it up, and there's nothing in it. And that was his.
Wrong though. There's
That was
more
his.
packages inside. Now they're also empty, but there is more to it.
Yeah, yeah. There's
Well,
more
yeah,
to it.
he's like the American director that threw his coffee, I guess, at the screen.
Yeah,
When
Yes, he is. Yeah, yeah. So what do they call those? The
Espresso?
Russian nesting dolls.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
the
the
babushka
babushka.
dolls.
Babushkas. It's like you keep going, you keep opening them and opening them, opening, and you expect something inside, and it's just no. But I think I think the gift of this film is all the discussion you can have. So I wouldn't call it a date movie, but it's a great movie to watch with somebody where you're going to spend time afterwards and just discuss it, because I'm enjoying this conversation. I couldn't talk to my family about it because they haven't seen it, but I really liked it, and I like talking about it.
I
What
think
about
it's
the
one
two?
of those.
Sorry, go ahead, Karen.
I think it's one of those movies where I don't typically like to watch movies twice or three times. I know Matt likes to watch a film again and again and pick up subtle nuances and different layers and elements. But I think with a movie like this, it's really worth watching again, because there's just so much more upon the second viewing, and analyzing it, I think, really adds to the beauty of the film.
So you were going to mention the TV series, I think.
Yes, I was. The remake, the 2018 TV series. We watched just a tiny bit of it and couldn't continue. Not because it was bad. Not because it was bad, but it was
Zamfir. I'm betting. That's what I'm betting.
No Zamfir, so no Matt. I'm not watching it. That's sort of my gauge for whether or not to watch something. No, the thing is that they made the whole thing kind of fraudulent from the get-go. The principal, Appleyard, is a young woman. She's pretending to be a widow, so they'll treat her better when selling her the property. So it's like the whole thing starts off from this kind of fraud, but she's a fairly young woman throughout the whole
This is
thing.
like Natalie Dormer from Game of Thrones.
Yes.
Yes.
And it didn't fit and feel right, so I'm gonna have to watch it a different time.
Well,
when we're not fresh off of the movie, I think so.
Yeah, it might be better, I think, standalone aside from this, but it certainly seems to be a different kettle of fish. They've really just diverted from the novel.
It has resurrected the whole myth of
mystery thing, though. I was completely unaware there was a new show, so this was all new to me. But I did read some reviews of it, since I totally didn't have time to watch the series. But they did mention, one reviewer described it as, the original movie, a lot of its value comes from the unanswered questions and mystery, and people who were bothered by that may find the series really better in a way, because it answers all the questions. But then by not having any mysteries at all, like answering every question, it leaves you're on a rail. You can't, now it's no longer a sort of collaborative process to watch the show. It's just what they're telling you is happening. So I think, maybe, and I'm not to criticize the audience, but leaving that mystery there does give you a lot of creative room as a consumer, or and I don't mean like as a shopper, but I mean as consuming media. Sure. It leaves you that work. So it becomes a creative process for you to watch the film and think about what it all means. So
absolutely, when looking at whether this story is true or not, another thing that we should take into consideration too is the author's admission that she'd based the story on a series of dreams that she'd had.
Oh yeah.
So there are certainly a lot of connections to a school that she went, I think, to. It was called the Clyde Girls Grammar School. And it was just a very posh school of the time in the 20th century. And so it seems like she even based the story on a picnic that the girls had gone to from that school in about 1919, around the time when she was attending. So I think that there's just ample evidence here that this was a fantasy. This was a work of fiction and not based on a true story.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So now that you've watched this, happy Valentine's Day.
Absolutely.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Again,
if you use this as a date movie, you better bring chocolate and flowers. So
Yes.
Although it is a better date movie than The Entity. So with that, Everybody, thank you for joining us again on this episode of
Thank you.
Based on a True Story. And feel free to like and subscribe and check out the Patreon page on patreon.com/monster talk.
You got it.
See you next time. Bye bye.
See you later.